webinar and refresher on trifectas and the party control of state governments. I wanted to first introduce myself. I'm Sarah Rozier, and I'm the news editor at Ballotpedia. And with us on today's call, we have Rob Oldham, who is a staff writer and state legislative expert, also at Ballotpedia. So welcome, Rob. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Sarah.
So today we're going to talk about trifectas. First, I want to go over what a trifecta is, and then we'll talk more throughout our meeting today about how this could be affected in 2018, what the consequences are of trifectas for things like redistricting and other legislative procedures, and how many are at risk for trifecta changes throughout this election cycle. So a trifecta is a term that we at Ballotpedia have used to describe single party control of a state's government, meaning that one party holds the governor's office, the state house, and the state senate. Political analysts here at Ballotpedia, we realized that there was something very significant when this was happening, when a trifecta occurred, because it meant that the party control was single-handedly under one party at the state level. We wanted to develop a term that would describe when the governor's house and both chambers of the legislature had this phenomenon, and there was no easy single word term. And so we created trifecta back in 2010, and we've been tracking them since then. So Rob, to get us started here, can you give me a breakdown of the number of trifectas by party and how that has changed in the past 3 or 4 election cycles?
Yeah, sure. So heading into 2018, we have 26 Republican trifectas, 8 Democratic trifectas, and 16 states where control of the government is split between the parties. So in other words, Republicans are dominating most state governments right now. That trend started in about 2010. So heading into those elections, Republicans were not in a great spot. They had just 10 trifectas, while Democrats had 17. And as you may know, the 2010 elections were a major Republican wave. They won state legislative seats and governorships across the country that year. After the elections, Democrats went down to 11 trifectas, and Republicans went up to 22. The next election in 2012 was a relatively calm year for both parties. Democrats gained 1 trifecta and Republicans gained 2. But in 2014, there was another strong move towards Republicans. And while they actually lost 1 trifecta, they broke a number of Democratic trifectas, so that after the elections, Democrats were down to 7 trifectas and Republicans were at 23. 2016 was not as strong of a year for Republicans as 2010 or 2014, but they still netted an additional 2 trifectas, bringing them to 25, and Democrats lost 1 trifecta, bringing them down to 6.
Yeah, that seems to be quite a reversal from the trend heading into 2010. So even on a calm year for Republicans in 2016, they still picked up 2 significant trifectas. So that's very fascinating to look at. One thing the pundits are talking about back in 2017, and now we've had a few recent elections in the first few months of 2018, are these 2017 and 2018 special elections and the regularly scheduled elections in Virginia and New Jersey at the state level. Each one, a lot has been discussed regarding the significance and how it's affected the partisan breakdown at the state legislative level. What impact have you seen in these 2017 statewide elections and special elections having on trifectas in 2017 and 2018?
Yeah, so 2017 was a big year for trifectas, and it wasn't just state legislatures either. Both parties actually picked up trifectas in 2017. The Republicans did it first, when in August, West Virginia Governor Jim Justice, who had been elected as a Democrat in 2016, he switched his party affiliation to Republican at a rally with President Trump. Because the West Virginia state legislature had already been under Republican control, this gave them a trifecta in West Virginia. In the November 2017 elections, the Washington State Senate came under Democratic control after Democrats won a special election for the District 45 seat. and the New Jersey governor's office also came under Democratic control when Phil Murphy was elected to replace Republican Chris Christie. So this brought both Washington and New Jersey under total Democratic control and moved them from 6 to 8 trifectas.
So definitely some significant changes then in 2017, and now we are heading into 2018. We are less than a month away from the Texas primaries, where there's been a lot of attention on some of those state legislative races, and of course these other trifectas across the country, and if there will be significant partisan changes in those. How many trifectas are possibly at stake in 2018?
Yeah, so we're still preparing our final analysis of which trifectas are vulnerable, but I was able to go through our ratings for governor's races and look at our list of state legislative battleground chambers to get an idea of which ones might be vulnerable. So I found that 4 of the Democrats' 8 trifectas and 7 of the Republicans' 26 trifectas might be vulnerable in 2018. So for the Democrats, the vulnerable trifectas are Connecticut, Delaware, Oregon, and Washington. And for the Republicans, the vulnerable trifectas are Arizona, Florida, Iowa, Michigan, New Hampshire, Ohio, and Wisconsin. So for the Democrats, I would keep my eye on Connecticut in particular. You have a competitive gubernatorial race to replace an unpopular Democratic incumbent, Dan Malloy, and you have both state legislative chambers as potential battlegrounds that could flip from Democratic to Republican control. Connecticut is actually one of the only states where I think it's possible that we see a Democratic trifecta completely flip to a Republican trifecta in just one election cycle. For the Republicans, their strong performance in state legislative elections since 2010 has put them in a pretty good position to retain majorities in swing states like Florida, Michigan, and Ohio. However, the 2018 maps put a lot of Republican governor seats in play, and many of their incumbents who were first elected in 2010, including those in Florida, Michigan, and Ohio, are term limited in 2018. We could also see the Republicans change through state legislative elections, particularly vulnerable chambers might be ones in Arizona, Florida, Iowa, or Wisconsin. And New Hampshire is probably the only Republican trifecta state where both state legislative chambers and the governor's office could potentially be in play.
Great. So that was a summary of the current trifectas and what their status is heading into 2018. What about the states that are currently under divided government, meaning one party is not in control of both chambers of the state legislature and the governor's mansion? What's their forecast looking like in 2018? Could we see some trifectas added? Will they remain under divided control? What's that looking like, Rob?
Yeah, so for the 16 states under divided government right now, it looks like 5 could possibly become Democratic trifectas, 3 could possibly become Republican trifectas, and 2 could really move either way. So the 5 that could become Democratic trifectas are Illinois, Maryland, Nevada, New Mexico, and New York. The 3 potential Republican trifectas are Alaska, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania. And the 2 that could go either way are Colorado and Maine. So again, the gubernatorial map is going to work against Republicans in 2018. Illinois and Maryland will both put one-term Republican governors up against blue states. In Maine, Nevada, and New Mexico, all of which voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, the Republican governors are term limited. Nevada and New Mexico's state legislatures are already controlled by Democrats, so wins in either gubernatorial race would give them trifecta control. If Democrats want to gain a trifecta in Maine, they will also have to break their slim Republican majority in the state Senate and hang on to their narrow control of the state House, as well as replacing the Republican governor. For Republicans, they have an opportunity to gain a trifecta in Alaska if they can both defeat the independent governor who was first elected in 2014 and take control of the state House, where they actually already hold a majority of the seats, but they're out of power due to the defection of 3 Republican representatives to a Democratic-led majority coalition. Minnesota also might become a pickup opportunity for Republicans if they can maintain control of the state house, which is traditionally flipped between the parties in recent elections, and if they find the right candidate to take on or to take over from retiring Democratic Governor Mark Dayton. Right now, it looks like former Republican Governor Tim Pawlenty might jump into that race, so definitely keep an eye on that one for a potential Republican pickup.
Yeah, it seems like across the country there are dozens of donors and political activists and outside satellite spending groups who are very much so keeping their eyes on these races Rob has mentioned. I know I'm based out of Maryland, and the chance to bring a Democratic trifecta back to that state has seemed to bring in a lot of Democratic activists and donors their eyes to the state. And one of these people who is focusing on this issue specifically is former President Obama Attorney General Eric Holder. He's recently said that his group, the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, was going to specifically go after these GOP trifectas. One thing I'm wondering, Rob, is what is the connection here between a group like the National Democratic Redistricting Committee and wanting to influence specifically these redistricting and Holder's stated mission of breaking up these GOP trifectas? What's the connection there between the GOP trifectas and groups wanting to influence redistricting?
Yeah, sure. So imagine that you control both chambers of the state legislature and the governor's office. If you leave the courts out of it, that means that you essentially control all 3 major veto points for making your redistricting plan the law. If your party is united, you can pass a redistricting plan that either favors your party, or if the other electoral trends in the state are moving against your party, it can at least minimize the damage to it. So in most of the 37 states where state legislatures are responsible for drawing congressional lines, a state or a party wants to control at least one element of state government when the maps are redrawn after the 2020 census. That is why these elections are so important for Holder's group and for Democrats. They want to have a seat at the table for the 2020 redraws, which they really did not have after their losses in 2010. So Democrats are already at a disadvantage in state politics. So this is their last chance to take back governor seats in most states, and their second last chance to take back state legislative chambers, because we'll also have elections in 2020 before those redraws happen. Holder specifically mentioned wanting to break trifectas instead of completely taking back state governments, which would be really difficult for Democrats to do considering their losses during the Obama presidency. For him, it's all about taking back at least one veto point. To kind of see an example of this, we can look at my home state of Georgia. So in Georgia, there's a gubernatorial election in 2018 that will decide who serves through 2022 and oversees the next redistricting cycle. Republicans have strong majorities in both state legislative chambers right now, but Democrats feel like they have a chance in the gubernatorial race. If Democrats win that race and hold Republicans below a 2/3 majority in the state legislature through the 2020 elections, then the Democratic governor can veto any Republican-drawn redistricting plan without fear of being overridden by the state legislature. So even though Democrats would not be able to draw a map that favors their candidates, they are at least preventing Republicans from drawing the map that is best for them.
That makes sense. So what about a state where so you mentioned there are 37 states where state legislatures are responsible for drawing these maps. What about a state where that's not the case? What's the consequences to the state party control in the legislature in those states for redistricting?
Yeah, sure. So there are 6 states where state legislatures do not draw congressional lines. 4 states use independent commissions. That's Arizona, California, Idaho, and Washington. And 2 states use what we call politician commissions. That's Hawaii and New Jersey. So an independent commission basically limits the participation of elected officials in drawing maps. although elected officials do often select some of the members who serve on commissions. For example, in Arizona, the majority and minority leaders in both chambers of the state legislature each choose a member to serve on the commission from a list of candidates that are determined by the State Commission on Appellate Court Appointments. The 4 members selected by the leaders then choose a 5th member who must be of a different political party than the other commissioners. A politician commission has a little bit more direct involvement by elected officials. They choose an equal number of appointments to the commission, and then those appointees will choose a tie-breaking member. There's sometimes a mechanism to select the tie-breaking member if the appointees cannot agree. For example, the state Supreme Court can become involved in New Jersey if the commissioners can't pick that last member. So if you have a commission that's drawing your lines, trifecta government matters less for redistricting than it would if the governor and the state legislators were the ones who were drawing the lines. In most cases, both parties are equally represented on the commissions, and the real power falls to the tie-breaking member, who is usually selected by other commission members or the courts.
Great. So that's kind of a general overview of what a trifecta is, what it looks like in 2018. There's another term that we've recently wanted to put a name to, and so I just wanted to kind of throw that in for a fun little extra credit here. So Rob, what's a triplex?
Yeah, so triplex is a kind of a new term that Ballotpedia has come up with, and it's similar to a trifecta, except that it refers to one party controlling all 3 of a state's major executive offices, which is the governor, the attorney general, and the secretary of state. So right now, Republicans control all 3 of those offices, or they have a triplex in 22 states, and Democrats control all 3 of those offices in 12 states. So similar to how a trifecta is useful in seeing how the parties do or do not come into conflict over issues like redistricting, a state's triplex status is useful to see the scope of conflict with respect to executive actions. So often the action you will see contested or in conflict is if the attorney general takes a legal action that the governor disapproves of. So I'll give you an example of that. In 2017, Maine's governor, Paul LePage, who is a Republican, and Maine's Attorney General, Janet Mills, a Democrat, came into conflict after Attorney General Mills declined to support President Trump's executive order that restricted travel from certain countries, as LePage had requested her to do. So after she declined to support the order, LePage filed a lawsuit against Mills, but it was later dismissed. So you can see here that state executive offices are coming into conflict because they are not controlled by the same party, and they might have different goals with respect to policies or other issues that the state is facing.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, that main example is really indicative of other states that we've seen in the past year, and we're expecting to see more of this in the coming years under the Trump administration when the state executive offices are split by party. We've seen it again in my home state of Maryland. We've seen it a few different places where the AG may join a lawsuit that the governor does not agree with. So that's another one to keep your eyes on for 2018, as a lot of those offices are up for re-election as well. So thank you, Rob, for this information. We at Ballotpedia will be tracking what happens with these trifectas and triplexes in the coming months. Stay tuned at ballotpedia.org for updates, and continue to stay in the know with our newsletters, our daily brew, our weekly tap, and our latest editions, The Heart of the Primaries for Democrats and Republicans, which are tracking at the state and federal level some of these primaries, the first step in these bigger races that are happening this election cycle. So email us at editor@ballotpedia.org if you have any follow-up questions, or tweet at us, and we'll be happy to answer any of those after this recording. So thank you, Rob. Thanks for joining me, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you very much, Sarah.